You're listening to the Future Tech Podcast with Richard Jacobs. Future technologies such as artificial intelligence, stem cells, 3D printing, gene editing, Bitcoin, blockchain, the microbiome, quantum computing, virtual reality, and exploring space are much closer than you might think. In fact, many early versions of these technologies are in play right now, and the companies that are using these technologies are the focus of this podcast. My goal for you, the listener, is to learn from these podcasts. You may very well learn something that may change the course of your life for the better, steer you towards a new career, or give you insight into addressing a thorny medical problem. Remember, this podcast and its content is informational in nature only. No medical, tax, legal, financial, or psychological advice is being given. If you've enjoyed the podcast, please listen, subscribe, like, and tell your friends about it. Thank you. Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with the Future Tech Podcast. I have Matt.Richtel, Pulitzer Prize-winning tech reporter for the New York Times, which is pretty cool. I haven't even gotten close to a Pulitzer Prize, so to talk to someone who has, it's a great thing. And we're going to be talking about The Man Who Wouldn't Die. It's a project that Matt is working on. So, Matt, thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me on, Richard.
Yeah. So tell me, what is this, The Man That Wouldn't Die? What inspired the project? What's it about? We'll get into it that way.
All right. Well, I've been covering Silicon Valley for the New York Times for like 20 years, and I've taken it very, very seriously. Like, I was there when Netscape appeared in someone's dream, and I was very assiduously, dutifully covering it. And 20 years in, I decided, wait a second, it's time to start making fun of this. The Man Who Wouldn't Die. The Man Who Wouldn't Die is a comedic detective novel set in Silicon Valley, where one of the great granddaddies of Silicon Valley goes head over handlebars over Alice's restaurant and dies, and then tweets from the afterlife, "I was murdered." And it turns out that The Man Who Wouldn't Die is a spoof detective novel about all the madness of Silicon Valley. And let me just pause there, because in a second I have a lot of things to tell you about, like why I decided to go crazy about Silicon Valley, and furthermore why it's not even written under my own name, which the publisher decided was something we should try. But I will pause and let everybody breathe and say whether they want to keep listening.
Well, did you as a publisher fear retribution, even though it's a satirical novel?
Well, I think they said, listen, Matt is a serious person, or we think he is, and he writes all these serious books and writes all these serious articles for the New York Times. Maybe we better signal to the world that this is something else altogether. And there's kind of a rich tradition of this, actually, as authors have played around with the voice they use. And I think in particular in this case, they said, well, listen, Matt was on bended knee taking notes with whatever, picking up Steve Jobs' spittle and in a cup and reporting on its genetic sampling. If he's going to start making fun of this stuff, maybe we should try an alter ego. So that's what happened. Can I tell you one thing that really made my day?
Sure.
This week, the New York Post called it a best of the week, and said it's a hard-boiled, hilarious detective novel. And that's perfect, because usually the New York Times reviews me in a serious way. It's good for the New York Post to review me for the hilarious side. I need a headline like what? Headless book named to found in Sunday A-list? I don't know. Give me a good New York Post headline.
Well, there was the old one of headless man found in topless bar. I don't know if that's real or not, but that was like an old headline. So some kind of pun, I guess.
All right. Well, I'm open to suggestions.
Well, yeah, I can see why you did it under a pseudonym, because then, as you continue to interview people and report on Silicon Valley, you don't want them to say, hey, am I just telling you this stuff for your next book where you're going to make fun of me, or, can I be real with you and tell you everything? So I can see why you'd want to do that.
I think I could see that. I also can see, I do feel like from my look, I live in San Francisco. I think many of us in Silicon Valley get that, we are satirical in our own way. I mean, one of the most frequently heard sentences I hear in Silicon Valley is, "Yeah, we got high class problems." And sometimes, from the concern we put into what our dogs are wearing to, making sure that our kids wind up in the proper free play pre-K environment. It can be at times an extremely self-serious place. And so I actually don't think most people are going to mind this. I think they're probably going to enjoy the fact that they can exhale a little bit.
Well, people always like to pick on people that they think are, better off than them, worse off than them, different. So yeah, I think you'll get a good reception to it. I don't think there'll be a problem.
So yeah.
So all right. So
go.
What did you have to do research to write the book, or did you just remembered what's happened over the past 20 years? Did you look at articles you've written, or because you're living or observing the lifestyle, it just came out of you, the book?
I mean, I'm so steeped in it, and I'll go to a Warriors game with a buddy who's who's an entrepreneur, and we'll start coming up with business ideas, and the line between a brilliant business idea and a satire is often very thin. There's one of the entrepreneurs in the book comes up with, so I used to, the thing I won my Pulitzer for was distracted driving. Sorry. I didn't win it for distracted driving. I won it for writing about distracted driving. I don't think you can win a Pulitzer for driving poorly. And, one of the entrepreneurs in the book has come up with a Drive Smart app for the car. And the way it works is that, and this thing has gone crazy. Everybody loves it. In your car, on your screen, you play a video game that is you actually driving your car. But it's much more fun to pay attention to the video game of you playing because you can score points. So it turns out everybody becomes a much better driver playing on their screen in their car rather than looking out the window. And
oh my God,
that's the kind of thing where you go, that's both idiotic, but it has a hint of truth to it. And there's, and at one point, University Avenue after dark in the book turns into a place where every storefront is telling you how you can, is beckoning you to come inside so that your kids can learn to take the SAT and learn an instrument to improve their college admissions possibility. I promise you that idea I came up with that idea long before anyone was using the backdoor alley to get into USC. So it's just 1 degree off of the madness we generally face.
That's cool. So yeah, it sounds like a really good read. Interesting. I know you don't want to give away the whole book, but any 1 or 2 particular anecdotes from it, or maybe material that didn't make it into the book that you thought it almost made it, but it would be really cool to talk about?
Well, one of the things that did make it into the book and that I am actually really interested in is, remember, this guy apparently tweets from beyond the grave saying that he has been murdered. Well, I'm actually genuinely interested in, I like to have substance even in the midst of trying to use some humor, but I'm genuinely interested in the idea about AI and our ability to reproduce ourselves. Like, could this guy actually, there's hints that in the book that Steve Jobs still exists somewhere out there. There's also hints that he's working with Bono to change everyone's ringtone, but that's clearly obviously true. Look, I'm really interested in this idea that about AI and reproducing the human experience. And I will tell you, like, of late, do you use Gmail, Richard?
Yeah, I do. Yep.
So do you get the little notification at the bottom that says here are some possible responses to an email?
Yeah. Thanks. That'd be
You probably
great.
don't use them.
No,
Yeah.
I hate them.
Look, okay, so you hate them. I get it. But I have to admit, the capacity, the computational capacity to be assessing those, because I read them to see how accurate they are, and yes, they are to some extent. They're very boilerplate, but I'm impressed by how the ability to mimic a human being. And I come back to the original ELIZA test. Do you remember when they would put do you remember these tests for AI where they'd put a computer essentially behind a curtain and a human behind a curtain?
Turing test.
The Turing test. Thank you. Right. So can I talk a little bit about why that there's an interesting facet of that is not often noted, that makes it so hard to distinguish a computer from a human. Can I just say something about that really quick?
Sure.
So on one level, you think, well, the computers have gotten sophisticated, but there's another way to look at it. And that is that human beings often are pretty rote. We draw from a series of stories, a series of cut and paste commentary that we tend to use over and over again. We actually don't go outside the lines of our own narrative very often. And what's kind of interesting as you think about Captain Don, that's the guy with all the yachts who's tweeting, or is he not tweeting from the afterlife? That you'll have to read the book to find out. But it's plausible to think that most of us aren't that hard to mimic. That it's not that the computers are so sophisticated, it's that most of us are less sophisticated than we imagine. And so I find that extremely interesting when you think about the Turing test, when you think about everything up to, say, self-driving cars, anything that seeks to understand how a human being relates. What makes us curious and difficult is that there are occasional outliers that muck up the whole predictability, but they're only fairly occasional. I mean, they might be grand if you play them out over the big scheme of math, but I find that extremely fascinating. Richard, in short, you and I aren't that interesting. As interesting as our wives tell us we are.
Well, if they tell you that, that's good too. But I guess it's say the 80-20 rule. 80% of what people do and are is can be systematized or recreated, and then there's that 5, 10, 15, 20% that's unique. Maybe less. Maybe
I think that's exactly, and maybe 95.5. And I think that's a really interesting. It's a really interesting facet of big data. Maybe we're going to figure out if it's more like 80-20 or more like 95.5. And I think a lot of really smart people with a lot of computing power are beginning to figure that out. And so what makes a spoof of Silicon Valley kind of fun in this respect is that there's enough substance that it's not, it lends itself to satire, but still can have substance underneath it.
Yeah, in thinking about this, I would bet that, there's like 20 master plots. There's, like the stories you've written. How many stories do you think you've written over the past 20 years? What's your guess?
Oh, you mean like for the New York Times?
Yeah.
I've tried to look it up. It's definitely several thousand. But is where you're going with it that they have major themes over and over again?
Right, you're probably right. I don't know, 7 or 10 different types of stories. I'm just guessing, pulling out numbers, but but they're almost always the same.
There was an effort some time ago, and I doubt. The reason I paused there, Richard, is there's a way we can segue here into the question of universal income. But let me get there slowly because I just leapt ahead. But there was an effort some time ago, and it may still go on, where you didn't even need a journalist for the sports pages. I think small newspapers tried this, where the coaches would send in the scores and who scored what, and a program would reconstruct a news story, about Team A beating Team B in basketball with, Jane Smith being the leading scorer, and
Mm.
Tanya Jones having the most blocks or whatever it was, and there was an effort to do that because the thing was so rote, which is a word I
Right.
realized I've used again. What does this have to do with universal income? Well, number one, it shows I've had too much caffeine and I'm making random segues. But the thing that in a serious sense, well, I have not had too much caffeine. But look, one of the questions we face as society is everything gets automated, what will happen to workers? And so that was where my brain went there. Is that people are saying, look, if we really do automate so many jobs that people, we need to create a sufficient income to live, and if you want to be more Machiavellian about it, a consumer base. You can see why that idea has percolated around Silicon Valley.
Well, what's your thought about universal basic income? Good idea, bad idea? What are some of the pros and cons of it?
I think it's a conversation worth having. I am ill-equipped to decide on these policy issues because I am ever the journalist and I can always give you both sides, which drives my wife out of her mind. But I think it's a conversation worth having because I think that it is easy to lose sight of the fact in Silicon Valley how blessed we are to have the education, the choices that we are afforded, and that when you get into places where the automation is taking over jobs, livelihoods, family incomes, that those of us, well, I wouldn't put myself necessarily in this group, but that those of you who are making the world more efficient, seem to be recognizing that there are massive side effects. I don't think that's lost on most people. There's a funny character in the book who, this is the daughter of the guy who's died. She's gone to our hard-boiled detective for his help in his name is Fitch. She's gone to him and says, my dad has tweeted from the afterlife that he's been murdered. And of course the detective's like, give me a break. But
Right.
She introduces herself and she says she is she's very charitable, she explains, and she is going to communities around the country where the children, unfortunately, are not learning to be as efficient as possible. And her job is to go teach maximum efficiency to the children of America. That is what she sees her. She says, would you believe there's entire communities in America who are not trying to be as efficient as humanly possible? And our detective faux gasped because this he does not see as a major issue.
Yeah. Well, from your perspective, I mean, do people in Silicon Valley really live that differently from everyone else? Are they trying to automate everything in their lives? How are they different from everyone else? If you have perspective on that.
Well, the way I think we, and I'll put myself in this group, are different than other people. First of all, I don't think people are different from their core, but I do think that the education that we've been afforded and the circumstances we have wound up in allow us a greater amount of choice than, and I don't think this is lost on most people I live around. I mean, I think there's an understanding how fortunate many people are in Silicon Valley. I am back actually spending this summer in my native Colorado. We did a house swap, and I have come across, as I often do when I come here, just simply in some ways a different set of economic circumstances for many people that become choice limiters, and that's where I think the chief difference is. Look, if you've had a good, if you've had a good exit from a company, or even a medium exit. The subtitle of the book is "Murder is Just Another Exit Strategy." If you've been fortunate, you are sitting on some ability to choose. It doesn't mean life with your kids is necessarily easier. It doesn't mean, your relationship is easier to manage. It doesn't mean that, go down the list, a medical issue isn't as serious as it is for someone else. But it does mean that you have more options. Again, I don't think it's lost on people in Silicon Valley, but I do think we're allowed to poke fun at ourselves. And I took a big stick to do that this time.
Okay. Well, so the book is what's the status? Is it available on Amazon and Kindle and all that?
The book is available all over the place. It's called The Man Who Wouldn't Die, and my pen name is A.B. Jewell. Each initial is my kid's middle name, and Jewell is my wife's middle name. So if you're looking for it under Matt Richtel, it ain't going to be there. The Man Who Wouldn't Die by A.B. Jewell. And then my website has lots of info on it, and that's mattrichtel.com. And hey, if you think you see yourself in the book, if you go, hey, I'm that guy, I promise it wasn't after you exactly. It was after someone just like you.
Are you going to have the characters in the book tweeting about their responses to the book, especially the dead guy?
I am now. That's brilliant. What do you want? How
much
now? See, now I have to get you. Now you have an intellectual property. Right off Sandhill. There's now in the book. There's a drive-through law firm that I thought of a little bit like Mofo, where you can, Morrison Forster, where you can go and get both a drive-through patent and a latte. And so the people who are at the booth are called barristeristas, half lawyer, half barista.
That's cool.
So you have just become my barristerista and patented I'm going to have to tweet from after I'm doing it. I'm starting today, Richard.
Okay. Well, that's cool. That makes sense. Those are the easy ones, You just do the obvious stuff like telling a pun as a joke. So I hope it helps you.
Yes, that's it. No, it's like dad jokes.
Exactly right. Yep, that's my specialty. So I got to keep it up. Well, excellent.
Very good. Very good.
I guess just one or two more questions. So you said that people in Silicon Valley are not really that different. They just have more choices. But are there any fundamental differences you see in the people in Silicon Valley, like mentally, their outlook? I mean, or are they just people that again just have more choices available to them?
Well, I do have to say the place breeds entrepreneurialism. And I do think that exists in a lot of places. But I will say that people in Silicon Valley feel to me, and here I define it very broadly as the whole region. It seems to have drawn people who are entrepreneurial in every facet of their lives. Like, they're entrepreneurial about how they approach their kids' school. They're entrepreneurial about how they approach their fitness or diet. And by entrepreneurial, I mean creative. They are kind of creative with intent. And I believe that is actually essential to the American spirit. And so it is everywhere. I just believe that Silicon Valley has drawn that. And when I say that, it's going to sound to a lot of people like a good thing. To me, it's good. It's not good or bad, because that spirit it comes with a lot of things. And I just find that is really endemic of the place. I think it is a beautiful thing. I just think it can go overboard, like any kind of powerful personality trait. But overboard, again, doesn't mean bad. It just means it can happen in excess.
What about the technology itself? I mean, you've been around long enough to be there with the .com boom and bust, and then crypto, and then what's going on right now. I don't know. Do you have any insights into? Do you really see the cyclical nature of technology, the fashion, the boom and the bust, or what's your perspective on it versus other people?
I look at right now, I don't look at the boom and bust quite so much as boom and bust. I look at it like there are a lot of things being seeded. A fraction of those things will work, and they will work at a huge level. So in that sense, I mean, this is like it's guppies that have the chance to turn into whales, and a lot of guppies are gonna, I don't know, it's a grotesque metaphor, but they're gonna die. They're gonna be swallowed up pretty easily. And so my big picture view of it is that it doesn't exactly boom and bust. There's millions and millions of small busts and some big booms that give rise to another set of, ideas. I think what makes this so hard to predict is essentially goes back to Moore's law. Things are moving at such a pace that it's hard to understand how they will come together in exponential capacities. But I want to offer one, if not chilling, then at least a reality check that strikes me. And that is, and I'm going to say it with a caveat. I am agnostic. I don't know whether there's a God or not. I lack the wisdom to know. And you may wonder why I'm saying that. But the reason I'm mentioning it is, for all the strides we're making in efficiency and technology, I am struck that happiness remains in tremendous flux. And we have delivered on a platonic ideal in a lot of ways in this country, and continue to deliver on it in no small part thanks to technology. But I don't think that has solved our existential challenge.
Right.
I think we still wrestle with core issues, and we should not lose sight of that fact in Silicon Valley. And I know many people have not, but it's just a core reality. So, and that goes to the back to the man who wouldn't die. On some level, for everything, our captain of Silicon Valley, Captain Don, who is tweeting from the afterlife, "I've been murdered," for everything he's achieved, he doesn't want to go either.
Yeah.
He said, by the way,
okay.
he says death is one of life's greatest inefficiencies and needs solving.
Well, that is true. Yeah, that is true. Well, excellent, Matt. So, while we were talking, I looked it up and confirmed. So, Kindle, Audible, Amazon, The Man Who Wouldn't Die by A.B. Jewell. The book's out there. So, it sounds super fascinating. I haven't read it yet because it's literally just come out, but I'm gonna get into it. And I appreciate you coming on the podcast and talking about it.
Much gratitude, Richard. Have a great day.
You're listening to the Future Tech Podcast with Richard Jacobs. Future technologies such as artificial intelligence, stem cells, 3D printing, gene editing, Bitcoin, blockchain, the microbiome, quantum computing, virtual reality, and exploring space are much closer than you might think. In fact, many early versions of these technologies are in play right now, and the companies that are using these technologies are the focus of this podcast. My goal for you, the listener, is to learn from these podcasts. You may very well learn something that may change the course of your life for the better, steer you towards a new career, or give you insight into addressing a thorny medical problem. Remember, this podcast and its content is informational in nature only. No medical, tax, legal, financial, or psychological advice is being given. If you enjoyed the podcast, please listen, subscribe, like, and tell your friends about it. Thank you.